Welcome to the Self Careapist Podcast. Join me, Lorraine Moorhead, a licensed psychotherapist, clinical supervisor, and EMDR consultant, along with expert guests as we explore the approaches and modalities we've used and developed to support our clients' success. Our conversations and stories are designed to inspire new and seasoned clinicians to stay curious, prioritize self-care, and never stop learning. Today, we get to hear from Professor Tony Attwood and Dr. Michelle Garnett, clinical psychologists with over 80 years between them specializing in autism. They are both clinicians, researchers, and authors, and currently provide training in autism and ADHD through Attwood and Garnett events, where they currently boast a library of over 34 on-demand trainings and live training opportunities. Their vision is to increase awareness, understanding, and acceptance of autism among parents, professionals, and the broader community. Today, we cover the overlap and distinct symptoms of ADHD and autism and co-occurring diagnoses, clinical and screening approaches and interventions, and how the understanding and support of neurodivergent individuals has changed during our tenure in the field. This episode is jam-packed with resources for anyone because neurodivergent folks exist within every clinical specialty. Welcome to the Self Careapist Podcast, Dr. Michelle Garnett and Dr. Tony Attwood.
Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here today. Would you be able to start just by sharing a little bit about how you got into the studies and application of autism and ADHD?
Sure. Well, Tony, you go first because you started first.
I began a long time ago. I was a university student, end of first year of psychology, worked as a volunteer at a special school and met two autistic kids. Now, that was autism in the 1970s. In other words, major communication difficulties, very high support needs, and decided to pursue a career in autism because the autistic children I saw at the special school really got me in the heart and the mind too of compassion, but also intrigue as to why somebody who looked like everyone else thought differently, had different interests, and learned in a very, very different way. And so decided to have a career in autism. Now, what's happened is that we now know autism is much broader, in fact, includes those who can talk, but sometimes too much. And it also includes aspects that it is rare to get what we call autism pure. It's nearly always autism plus ADHD, mood disorders, specific learning difficulties, and so on. And also associated with conditions such as eating disorders and gender dysphoria. So it's no longer the silent, aloof autistic child. It is realizing this is a much larger area for exploration.
Wow. Part of what has led to that is just a broader understanding of the criteria. The people haven't changed. We've just become more skilled at recognizing a broad spectrum of individuals.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. It means that autism has always been here, probably for thousands of years. But it's only now that we've recognized, we're more sensitive, I think, to picking up the characteristics, but also understanding the experiences of an autistic person.
Really neat to hear that background. And Michelle, how about you?
Well, I was going to jump in there because I came in at a pretty significant crossroads, I think, in our new kind of more sensitive understanding of autism, as Tony describes. I came in the early 90s. So when I started over 30 years ago, what really grabbed me about autism was that this was something completely different in my master's in clinical psychology training. Prior to that, we'd done a lot of social learning models, and this was about someone who looked just the same as me, as anyone, but a very different interpretation of the world was going on. And that was not about learning behavioral contingencies or anything that we'd been taught a lot about, cognition, etc. This was just about neurology. And that completely fascinated me. So I was kind of bitten by the bug of autism 30 years ago. I was very lucky to have Tony visit the university where I was doing my master's at that time. And of course, as you probably know, Lorraine, Tony is a very charismatic speaker. I was just hooked, line and sinker, like that's my career. I want to know everything I can about autism. And I didn't know it at that time, but it's become apparent to me, of course, in the decades since, that autism describes not only many members of my family and my friends, but also myself.
Oh.
So it felt like home when I was understanding autism, which was kind of odd to me, but it just felt so familiar, but it took me ages to work out why. So that was my journey. But when I came in, Asperger's syndrome, as it was being called then by Tony and other trailblazers around the world, like Lorna Wing and Christopher Gilberg, this wasn't even in the DSM or the ICD. So we didn't really know a lot about Asperger's syndrome. One of the first questions was, is it different from autism? And if it is, what are the differences? Or are we studying something completely different? So the first 20 years of my career was, I would always get the question, what's the difference between Asperger's syndrome and high functioning autism? That was one of the main questions. And Tony's answer was always, they're spelt differently, which I thought was very apt, very accurate and succinct, which is Tony. And the other question was, is Asperger's syndrome actually autism? That was really what was important to know. And of course, then in 2013, we had the changes to autism so that it's now understood. Autism is understood as a spectrum disorder. And just as I say that out loud, I'm very aware I'm using very medicalized terms here because DSM and ICD are medical Bibles, if you like. And so I wouldn't call autism a disorder off the bat. I don't think that's an apt term, but I know that's the term that's used medically. And also that this idea of a spectrum, I think it's also important that people are aware a spectrum is like a cloud. It's not a line. So we're not talking from mild to severe here. We're talking about there's many dimensions. And so that's why there's so much diversity in autism.
Can you give a little background too on where you practice now and how you guys work together?
Yeah, sure. Each of us have our own private practice in Brisbane, here in Queensland, Australia. And in addition to seeing clients, we both write and we create, and we do a lot of writing, for example, for blogs to get information out there on topics that we feel is very important. And we also write to make sure that all our trainings online are up to date. We have our own office in West End where we meet and we cogitate and we create. I don't know, that's how I would describe it. It's a very exciting life when your special interest is what you do for work. So I love it because I'm always exploring and learning more about autism, neurodivergence, ADHD, etc. But Tony, how would you describe how we work together?
I would say similarities with Lennon and McCartney.
I love it. Thank you. You can see why I work with Tony. Very often.
Well, no, what it means is that you obviously you look at a particular topic from an intellectual level, but we also approach it from an emotional, compassionate level too, and being creative. So when we meet, we find that we're very creative in the sense of insightful, but also coming up with strategies. So it's very much not just a clinical, but it's a creative combination between the two of us.
Oh, that sounds like the best combo. And you mentioned you're in Australia, and I'm wondering what differences in language or interventions that we might have here versus how you regard things in Australia. Have you come across anything like that that stands out?
I may jump in on this. Sure. This is a personal reflection, is that the Europeans and Australians talk to Asperger's syndrome, high-functioning autism, and especially autism in girls and women, far more openly than the United States, which has a degree of conservatism in this area. So Australia has always been a very, she'll be right, mate, she'll be right, no worries approach, which is more open than the, in inverted commas, conservatism of the United States.
Yeah.
And if I could add a little, just from what I see online now, I see a lot of great things happening in the States at the moment in terms of the neurodiversity affirming movement. So that movement is huge here in Australia right now, thankfully. So it's informed, for example, the National Autism Strategy that was released earlier this year, and has also really been influential in forming the new competencies that have been written for clinical psychologists that we need to follow as a regulated profession in Australia. And these, I think this is such a leap forward for neurodivergent folk. And I see this happening in the States as well. Not living in the States, I don't know how that's landing or where or how much impact it's having on generalist practitioners who are not necessarily in this area by choice. It just comes to them because lots of autistic people seek therapy. And so I don't know how much it's spreading there, but certainly online there's a lot of activity, which is good, I think.
Yeah, that's my sense too. It seems we're really looking at a strengths-based approach and all of the really robust strengths that an individual who might be neurodivergent has. And I definitely see some of that too. Is Asperger's still a common word to be used in Australia?
No.
Not in Australia. Strangely enough, it is in certain parts of Europe. Ironically, in Germany and Austria and Switzerland, the German-speaking countries, also to a certain extent in Italy and France, so that there are still some areas of, should we say, acceptance of the term Asperger's syndrome. But now, effectively, it's an obsolete term.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I liked that. I haven't heard that language before of pure autism. And so we're going to talk today about some of the plus that you mentioned earlier, Tony. I really like that. And so what is AuDHD, and how does that dual diagnosis differ from the symptomology that you would see in just autism or just ADHD?
Okay. What it means is that autism and ADHD are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they often occur together. Roughly 60-70% of autistic individuals will have fragments of ADHD, if not a dual diagnosis. And what AuDHD is it's a blend of both conditions, but they may either amplify problems or they may, say, counterbalance particular issues. And it depends on the facet of abilities that you're looking at. And a lot of AuDHD people say, is this an autism thing? Is it an ADHD thing? Or is it just my personality? It can be very confusing because there's an expectation of someone, you're autistic, you'll be like this. You're ADHD, you'll be like this. But when you got both, it's very confusing. And there are all sorts of problems with attention, also social interaction problems, emotion regulation. And for example, an autistic person likes routine and predictability. I don't like uncertainty, but person with ADHD likes spontaneity. This is boring. And so you've almost got contradictory components. So we're only starting to recognize it. It's bits of both that may vary within the day and intensity, which is very confusing for the individual and those who support them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tony. Such a superb answer. It's and I just want to add, there's been some interesting research because, of course, until May 2013, when DSM, the new one, came out, we weren't allowed to diagnose both at the same time. So you had to diagnose autism if autism was there, and that trumped ADHD. And that really led us for a long time. But both Tony and I were very aware that, oh my God, sometimes ADHD is the most flagrant thing in the room. This is what we need to address.
Yeah.
So we were all ignoring that advice and we thought we were doing a good job. But now we realize we were missing ADHD all over the place because of all that diagnostic overshadowing that was actually allowed. So I think that's one of the reasons, of course, we're getting so much more AuDHD now. People are coming forward saying it's not just autism, this is way more. And the way more is much more around executive function difficulties. But there was an interesting study recently that showed that of 16 executive functions that were studied, only 3 were different in terms of distinguishing between autism and ADHD. So that means 13 executive functions were all the same, like hyperfocus, distractibility, and organizing oneself, initiation, very difficult things to do if you're autistic or if you are ADHD, as Tony said. But interestingly, the 3 that were distinct, flexibility, if you have tended toward rigid, rigid thinking, rigid ways of doing things, and I own it, I'm like this is autism, not so much ADHD. And also what distinguished autism, interestingly, was real difficulties with planning, much more difficulties with planning than our ADHD folk, if you're just ADHD, which really surprised me.
Yeah.
So, and then, but I have an ADHD daughter and she's amazing at planning. And I've met a lot of clients that are ADHD only and they're amazing at planning. It's following the plan. That's the tricky bit. That's the difficulty in ADHD. Yes. And that's difficult in autism too. And the other thing that distinguishes, it only distinguished ADHD was impulsivity. So impulsivity is it's not an autistic trait. So I thought that was interesting when we start to tease out the executive functions.
Yeah, I would add that there's a dimension of autism that can be important here, and that's processing time.
Yes.
That is that the person is very much looking at the pros and cons of various options and things like that. Mm-hmm. And they're processing social, cognitive, linguistic, all sorts of information, whereas the ADHD person tends to be impulsive and then apologizes, whereas the autistic person takes a while to make that response because they're very thoughtful and very thorough.
Deep thinking, monotropism. So very much, so Wen Lawson has just written a whole book on monotropism as hyperfocus, but deeper than hyperfocus, not just ability to focus on something to the exclusion of everything else for a long time, but also a style of processing the world that is just as Tony described. It takes time. There isn't a quick way. I will take all this in. And it's almost like my husband calls it background processing. We're background processing a lot, all the time, because it takes time for things to really make sense.
I can understand how that can be misunderstood too. If you're looking at the processing and watching it unfold, you might not, as an observer, understand where the delay is coming from.
Yeah. And one of the issues you face is you've got an autistic person who's processing, and you think, oh, they're off, they've lost track or whatever.
Yes.
And you interrupt them, and they hate that because we're going to go right back to the beginning. Why did you interrupt me? I was still... But if you're beside the person, you think, do I reframe it? Are you there? How long do I wait?
Yeah.
It can be very confusing.
When I was growing up, of course, I was only diagnosed 2 years ago. So I was 53, I think. I was always considered dreamy. My parents would always call me dreamy. And that was partly ADHD, distracted by my own imagination. But it was also really slow processing, just taking more time to take in particularly social and emotional information. And I misinterpreted that of being called the dreamy kid as the stupid kid. She can't think. She's too off with the fairies. There's something wrong with her. So it can be misinterpreted and then internalized as something that's bad about yourself,
Right.
and that then, of course, has lots of knock-on effects for your mental health in the future because of internalized self-labeling in negative ways, because you haven't got a neurological understanding, of course, at that time. And this is true of many, many women and men now, and non-binary. Many people are recognizing their ADHD traits, particularly at the moment, later.
Is there anything in particular that you think leads people to be more curious about it later?
There's many pathways. Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the things that we see a lot, for example, is you have your child diagnosed. That's a classic one. So mums, dads coming in and then, oh my goodness, when I was ticking those boxes on the questionnaires, that was me. I thought everyone was like that. And then suddenly kind of having this moment, this aha moment, oh, I must be on the spectrum too, or I must be ADHD. But also, sadly, a lot of pathways to this, what we call discovery of your neurodivergence, rather than diagnosis. This discovery is actually secondary diagnoses. So because it's difficult to be what everyone expects you to be, and because we collect labels that perhaps feel more like a criticism, character assassination, why don't you try harder? What's wrong with you? All those sorts of messages that come in for both autistic kids and ADHD prior to diagnosis and even after diagnosis. What happens is we can become very upset and feel excluded and very unhappy about who we are, and self-identity is affected. And so we often see people who are presenting for social anxiety, depressive disorders. Sadly, trauma is common. Borderline personality disorder. There's so much crossover between the two presentations. Many autistic women have collected a borderline personality disorder diagnosis along the way. Eating disorders, as Tony said before, addictions as well. So anything that affects humans affects autistic humans. But sadly, I would actually say for autistic and ADHD humans, we're facing a mental health epidemic. It's massive in number. So there would be many clinicians who are treating adults in their practice who are neurodivergent, but they wouldn't be aware necessarily that they're doing that because that neurodivergence has been so well hidden, camouflaged. But certainly the symptoms of all those distressing disorders will be there.
I was thinking that you guys tell me if you would agree with this, but it feels like early in my career, we would see folks seeking a diagnosis at the elementary school age, and then maybe at college age, because things get so challenging to manage all of the demands and the high level. And now I wonder, as you were talking, I was just thinking if we're also seeing it more now after having children as a milestone, because there's so much to manage again at that time, and little voices asking questions and, postpartum. So I was just thinking of different milestones later in life now that we might be granting permission to seek a little more information.
There's an element both for autism and ADHD of camouflaging, that you know that you're different. So anything that marks you different, you suppress. But the trouble is, for autism, a lot of things that you're suppressing are coping mechanisms. And you create a mask, you create an alternative persona, which is popular and allows you to be included, stops you being marginalized, rejected, bullied and teased and so on. So you have a false persona, a false self. Again, both autism and ADHD. But there comes a time in life where the person may feel, I can't keep doing this. I'm experiencing burnout. It's making me depressed. I'm a false self. I can't live with myself for doing this. That there's a realization I need help because I've hidden my true self for so long.
Absolutely. And what you said there too about postpartum depression, there's been research to show that for autistic women, 60% in the literature now will likely develop postpartum depression. So that can be a reason to seek help. So certainly, as Tony said, camouflaging and then too much strain, stressors, the wheels fall off, I can't do it anymore. And then hormones, another huge one. Menopause, massive. To suddenly find I can't camouflage anymore. I haven't got the energy. I haven't got the mental capacity to do that right now.
Yeah, about camouflaging or masking, what are we looking for in terms of that? It seems like years ago we might have said, let's teach our folks to camouflage or mask better. And
Mm.
now, how would you summarize the headline
I know,
for
isn't it
our
interesting?
the approach on camouflaging or
I think
masking?
it's just amazing how much things have changed in autism. Wouldn't you agree, Tony, over the years?
I would.
Yeah.
I read something the other day, and it's more that in socializing, an autistic person has a different style of
Mm.
socializing. It's not wrong. It's that style. Now, the thing is, that style is often picked up by other autistic individuals, so they really do get on exceptionally well.
That's
But
true.
it's two different styles, and one is not superior to the other. It's different. And so the view is, instead of we will correct you and make you a clone of everyone else, it's basically saying you have a different way of doing things, and we need to work out how can this be as cohesive as possible in interactions and find your culture.
Mm. Yes, I love that. I think it really is amazing how we do that. I've thought about that a lot since I've read similar things. And I've even now read some good descriptions of the sorts of ways neurodivergent people tend to socialize. And it is things like info dumping. You just share information. It's just fascinating being on that track, just learning from each other and
Yeah.
sharing the joy of these discoveries along the way. And
Yeah.
small talk is so misunderstood by autistic people, I think, overall. And it took me ages to understand small talk. I remember for a long time people would say, why do people talk about the weather? It's so boring. And of course, now I realize it's resonance. It's just glue. It's the connection. It doesn't matter what you say. You're just enjoying the vibe. You're saying, hey, it's hot today. Yeah, it's really hot. And we're here together and we're having this nice conversation. Now that I understand small talk, I can really enjoy small talk because I realize it's not about the information. But a lot of us take it so literally. It's so important to talk about something interesting.
It is. I'll amplify that point in a way. If there's an expectation of a reciprocal conversation, that's one of the
There is an
diagnostic
expectation.
criteria. But what you may get is, for example, two autistic teenage girls at lunchtime sitting beside each other, drawing, but in silence. But there's a connection. There's a sixth sense connection. They don't have to be talking, but there is just something that's going on between them. And at the end, they may compliment each other on the drawings and off they go. But they actually had a really good connection at that time. But for non-autistic people, you can't see the connect. You can't hear it. You can't see it in body language, but it's there.
Yeah, it's so true. That's another really great example. That presence is all that's needed, not needing to talk. But I think also we only knew visible autism before, the signs and symptoms as they're described in DSM. You can see how then a lot of people, particularly camouflagers like me, would be missed because we can use eye contact, we can use our faces and gesture and body language, and we can have reciprocal conversations. So I think it's difficult for a clinician who's trying to determine if their client may be autistic. There may have been a few things that they thought, oh, that seems autistic. You can't rely on DSM or ICD to actually help you navigate that space anymore. It's really hidden. But I think it's really useful to also recall that it's very clear from research that even if you're camouflaged as an autistic or ADHD person, you do have the same symptomatology going on. So the external signs won't be there, but the actual reality of autism will be going on. And what you can ask is you can, in the clinical interview, that's where Tony and we share this, that we get the richest information to understand camouflaging just by asking questions. Things like, when did you first notice that you were different from others? Because that's such a key sign. Most ADHDers and autistic people will really feel that very early on, that they are different and they don't get it. They don't understand why, but they're different from others. And then we will ask about that and how they coped with that and what they did. And usually you just get the most amazing stories about how that person really realized that they needed to learn a lot here, and they started observing their peers and they started to work out. And for example, I've had clients who have told me that they've even worked out mathematical algorithms for reading eyes. And this one woman said to me, it's not the eyeballs you're reading, Michelle, it's all the muscles around the eyes. And that's where algorithms are really helpful. I'm going, wow, what a different way of approaching this. Because the innate capacity to just instantly, intuitively read it isn't there. So you've got to find a way around. And this intellectual working it out, observing, making sense of things like a scientist is one way of coping with being autistic. And same with ADHD too, working out ways around. And so this becomes really apparent in our interview when we ask, but also there's good measures out there now for determining if someone is using camouflaging as a coping mechanism for being autistic or for ADHD. And that's the CAT-Q, if you may have heard of it. It's the camouflage, oh goodness, is it? The
Camouflaging Autistic Traits Questionnaire.
Yes, thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
We've created a really good questionnaire for women as well, the modified questionnaire for autism spectrum conditions. And that's very good for picking up those not in the DSM autistic signs and symptoms, I guess, of being autistic.
Oh, that's great. I'll link both of those.
That'd be great.
I have to tell you, you know, the old joke about animal lovers in the pet shop wanting all the animals. That's me in this podcast with wanting to specialize in everything and use all the screeners.
I love that. I agree. I'm like that. I want to specialize. I just want to know, and I want to get all the detail. Yeah.
And once you get to hear from passionate people on every subject, it's like, well, I love that. I want to work with them.
It's infectious.
Awesome. Totally.
Yeah.
You mentioned the women specific screener. What are some of the traits that you've come to recognize that differ a woman from a man?
Yeah. Tony, do you want to lead on that? Because you know how I am. Blah, blah, blah. I'm one of those ones that talk too much.
Okay. Some thoughts on this. I think the core autistic features are central to both genders. It's how you adapt to it. This is the whole theory of adaptations to autism. But it also means that there are different social expectations for girls, different cultural expectations for girls.
Mm-hmm.
And girls, I find, are often more imaginative and creative in how they cope. A lot of the boys are explosive, disruptive, and irritating, and they're often referred on because they're trouble, a nuisance. But the girl is much more constructive in, I need to understand this. And part of autism is the ability with systems and patterns. And so they apply this to social problems and they start to work out patterns and things that are going on. One of the things I think somebody said, I learned that if you want to be accepted, you've got to smile and fake being happy.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's true. Sorry, I learned that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of women would.
They would agree
with. Yeah.
I think that's true.
Especially because women will get comments like, "Why aren't you smiling? Oh, why do you look so angry?" Yeah.
So true. Yeah. Can I just also add that I think that there's also, it's obviously there's now a lot of recognition that there are a lot of people who will not necessarily relate to being female or male, and that we understand there's lots of different gender profiles. And so we don't have enough research on this, because even though that's true, and there are many people who are transgender or different gender profile, we don't have sufficient quantity to really understand their experience. But the little experience we do have through research and clinical work is saying that their experience as marginalized, even more so, disability is marginalizing, but so is being gender different. Their experience is usually very much camouflaging. And so when we talk about the female presentation, as camouflaging, Tony and I have started to shift to talk about it, the camouflaging subtype of autism, because it does include all gender profiles. It's just that usually females, queer and trans tend to camouflage more for protection, usually.
I have an autistic son, and I remember when he was younger, we were talking about learning social skills and so on. And my son, Will, said, "But Dad, doesn't everyone learn to socialize him by copying each other?"
Oh, yeah.
To which I replied, "Not always."
No, not necessarily.
Oh, that's such an informative statement.
It is. Opened the gates to a new understanding, really, didn't it? That was the comment where, and then Will decided, yes, I'd like to see if I am neurodivergent, and certainly got the diagnosis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, one of the pluses that we need to explore further is anxiety. And anxiety actually drives a lot of autistic characteristics. If you take DSM-5 TR-B, almost all B are related to anxiety. Even sensory sensitivity and anxiety co-regulate each other. But what happens is that quite a few autistic individuals will have horrendous anxiety and will discover their own means of coping with it, which can include drug taking, can also involve behaviors such as eating disorders and so on. So something that we need to explore further that's common to both is high levels of anxiety. And how do you react to them?
Yeah, definitely.
What are some clinical approaches or clinical interventions that you find yourself using when working with autism, either with anxiety or with the other pluses? I say that like that because we aren't treating in our offices autism. We're often being asked to treat the pluses.
I think that point that you make is so very important, Lorraine. Thank you. I was going to start with that because it is still the case that some clinicians, and fair enough, because this is the way DSM tends to work, will think, okay, if you're autistic, ADHD, I need to treat those conditions. And and that's where we used to be too, by the way. That's how I was trained in ADHD 30 years ago. You treat the ADHD as in give them practice in stopping and thinking before they act. We will train that impulsivity out of them. And of course we found out you can't. And it's not something we can do. And in the neurodiversity affirming movement, as you would know, it's about actually embracing that and saying for every one of my neurodivergent traits, whether they're ADHD traits or autistic traits or another form of neurodivergence, there's always going to be a strength to that as well as a challenge. So in our therapy, one of the first things we do is we modify. Our therapy is about always, Tony and I will always say, it's about accepting yourself, who you are, how you roll. And a lot of us neurodivergent folk have very high levels of anxiety just daily, normally. That's just life. And so then it becomes, well, how do I manage that? So the treatment isn't get rid of, whack-a-mole therapy, get rid of that trait, get rid of that whatever sign, symptom. It's about understanding that and seeing how it can be helpful. It's welcoming that trait into your life, accepting it, accepting who you are, and in all the flavors that you get in the broad range of diversity that is neurodiversity. And then importantly, how do I harness those strengths, but also try to have a lifestyle that really embraces what I need to feel manageable levels of anxiety through the day. And it took me ages to recognize that for myself and my clients because of being trained so much in that, CBT, 16 sessions. And also you'd have this in the States. We have it here that's the way the system works. You have to sign off to say, yes, I will treat this suicidality or the agoraphobia, the OCD, and we will get rid of all that stuff. But this is much more about learning about those things, accepting them, and then working with them, not trying to eradicate them. And so, having said that, I know as soon as I mention OCD, you've got to think exposure response prevention. That's about trying to reduce the compulsive acts, the obsessionality. And that's really good because that's reducing distress. And that's one of the goals we have as health practitioners, reducing the distress. It's just we do that in an autism-friendly way. And that means, for example, and this is where we know that clinicians do need to understand how to give good therapies like exposure and response prevention to autistic people with modifications for autism. But essentially, you're modifying for sensory issues and social communication issues. And the sensory, for example, in exposure, always think, is this anxiety because of a sensory issue? Because if it's sensory doesn't habituate. So we're going to have to find a way around that sensory pain or distress, and it's only the anxiety that will habituate. So it's just being mindful of those things. But there's a lot of research now to inform us about which therapies to use to treat mental health conditions for autistic and ADHD people. And essentially they're saying we can use the same modalities, ACT, IFS, DBT, all of the ones that you are trained in, EMDR, just modify. Understand neurodivergence, autism, ADHD, and modify.
I would very strongly endorse the resilience. Clinically, I'm afraid what we're having to do is try and repair the damage done by other people in the sense of rejection, humiliation, bullying, and teasing.
Yeah.
It's difficult enough being autistic, but my greater concern is how people treat an autistic individual, how that affects their concept of self. So we're trying to, should we say, the more resilient you are and more self-understanding, the more you can cope with issues of anxiety and so on.
Yeah.
But there's also trying to use autistic characteristics constructively in the therapy. For example, the special interest as metaphors. Michelle and I are great fans of Harry Potter. So we'll have boggarts as anxiety and dementors as depression.
Right.
And one of the great characteristics of autism is imagination. And so that person then has an understanding and a role. So we're more flexible. You don't do the cookbook. You've got to do this, that, and the other. It's being much more creative in weaving in the interest. But it's also working with the individual in how to explain, not correct, but how to explain an autistic characteristic to other people so that they can change their attitude. I'm the sort of person who tends to look away when you're talking, helps me concentrate on what you're saying. I'm the sort of person who sometimes doesn't get the not now signals, and I see, have I interrupted you, etc. So it's finding out what is the autistic characteristics confusing or abrasive to others, and explain it so other people go,
That's it.
I get it now.
Yeah.
Oh, that's easy. And now I know what to do. So it's being creative in a way. It's not changing. It's understanding.
Oh,
Absolutely.
That's so cool.
It is so cool. It's nice. I love the way Tony explains it because it's practical, doable things. Sometimes, of course, we've got to help with confidence. The client may feel, because of so many incidents, even subtle ones of peer rejection, exclusion, being criticized, they don't feel confident, that self-advocacy to say the spoken social story, to say I'm the sort of person who, that can take some time to learn, but that's okay. We can do that. That's a really good goal in therapy, as Tony said, that building that resilience and confidence. And that is it is about having that positive self-identity, recognizing who we are. Yeah.
It's reducing shame, and even the light-hearted delivery. It's casual. It's not a deal breaker. It's not ending the conversation. It's just, I'm the sort of person who isn't going to look at you directly because I'm processing.
At lunchtime,
Perfect.
I don't want to sit with the others gossiping, because I think that's actually destructive. So I'm going to read my book.
Yeah, I'm the sort of person who reads at lunch.
Yeah, that's it.
Exactly.
No big deal.
No big deal.
Yeah.
And it's nicer too, because I know, like, for example, this is going back a little way, my clients would come back after having the discovery and say, I tell people I'm autistic and they don't get it. And it's so true. That term just means so many different things to so many different people. So this is why I love the spoken social story, because it can be just very specific in terms of giving people the information they need to help them navigate the interaction with you, but you don't necessarily have to disclose. For example, there's still a lot of stigma
Yes.
and discrimination with
Yeah.
autism and ADHD. We don't have to go there. We just
Give
convey
the information
needed at the
that's going to be
time.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I really like that. We'll print that on a t-shirt. And you had said something a minute ago that I feel we need on a t-shirt too, which was about habituation to the sensory. And so I just want to recap that it sounds like if we're trying to use exposure, for example, to get someone used to noises, or then it's not, they're not.
Sadly. No.
It's just not going to happen. And so
they're going to get more and more stressed.
Yeah.
They are. But in exposure response prevention, etc., if you've got autism ADHD, then one of the problems is going to be they're not very good at waiting and enduring. Their whole life has been immediate. What. And so it's a very unusual situation for that person to wait and endure till the anxiety goes. So they're going to need a lot more support, a much more smaller steps when you're doing that, and a lot more support in exposure response prevention, because it's not an automatic response in that situation. Yeah.
That's true.
Are there modifications that you've seen in terms of visualization, like some of the mindfulness that we have in EMDR or DBT? Do you see that as something that might need to be modified when we're working with this population, or does it just depend on the person?
It so depends on the person. Thank you for raising that, because I personally am a huge advocate of this third wave that we have in our therapy toolkit and educationalists as well of mindfulness. But I have found because of often a different learning profile in autism and ADHD, there is a proportion, it's small, but there's a proportion of people who just can't visualize. So for mindfulness, we just wouldn't go there. Luckily, there's loads of ways we can use mindfulness. We can, whatever object we use to bring that into our attention, that can be a sound, it can be a piece of music, it can be a body feeling, doesn't have to be anything visual. And even if you're doing EMDR and sometimes people get images, need to process images. If you're not a visualizer, you're not going to get those images. We're going to be doing a lot of more processing of those body sensations usually. So I think it's just, my approach, and certainly this is coming out in the literature now, is getting to know your client really well to understand what is going on for them. And what autistic people are telling us is that typically their experience in the past, whether they're diagnosed or not, actually, whether they're discovered or not, is that they don't feel believed because their experience is outside the range of the neuronormative. It's like, that's, I can't believe it's that bad. Surely you can if you try harder. And that is a deal breaker. Like that autistic person's just going to back off and not come into the office anymore. So I think it's really about believing our clients, listening to their experience, and they'll tell you, I don't do pictures in my head, or, I find it really hard to tune into my body. I can't feel my body. I'm just this head. Well, I've had so many clients say, my body's just like a support system for my brain. It takes my brain everywhere. I'm not here for this body. They don't, there's often a mind-body disconnect with them.
Yeah, thank you. That's an important point. There is a mind-body connection often in autism. So they're not picking up the internal signals of increasing heart rate, breathing, and all those sorts of things, which are the warning signs of increasing anxiety or agitation. So a major therapy focus is to, shall we say, achieve a mind-body connection.
Yeah. So interoception becomes a huge piece. And the other part of that for autistic and ADHD is alexithymia. So when we're talking about those adaptations, I'd always screen for both trauma and alexithymia, because you're going to probably be using trauma-informed approaches for autistic people. There's a lot of trauma in autism, sadly, and ADHD, but also that piece of being able to tune into your feelings and actually accurately describe them. is very often not there. So that's, as you know, that alexithymia is a huge risk factor for developing mental health conditions with or without autism. But if you're autistic, ADHD, and alexithymic, it's that there's a lot of risk factors there to develop all sorts of mental health conditions.
On that topic of alexithymia, the problem with alexithymia is it's finding the spoken or to say. First of all, with interoception, you've got to pick up the signals. Then you've got to find the word that describes it in speech. But one of the amazing things for many autistic individuals, they do it in the arts. They can do it by singing or finding music, drawing pictures, going Google images. And that's why there are a considerable number of autistic individuals who have a natural talent in the arts, maybe their career, because it's the way of describing the self, the feelings, etc. Through the arts, they compose music. They have an ability to write fiction and a whole range of things that occur. So if you're adapting therapy, it would include music therapy, art therapy, dance therapy, and drama therapy to overcome the problem of alexithymia.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's wonderful resources online. I used to run a clinic specialized to autism, and in every room we had a poster or a cushion with the wheel of emotion on it. You would have seen them on the internet, and that's the wheel of emotion. If you haven't seen one and listening, I'd really recommend Googling it. They're so helpful to just really help our clients recognize what sort of emotions are going on, particularly those subtle ones. We can easily say, I'm feeling bad, but what does that mean? When we get behind bad, there's often a whole range of different emotions, and that's very rich for our clients to understand and start to feel in their bodies. And then, of course, the goal is to help our clients to use their bodies to self-regulate, that we've actually got this wonderful system going on that's set up to help us self-regulate. But if you can't use it, it's useless. You're just lost in anxiety or shame or whatever the emotion is.
Have you heard any routines or systems, even if they're outside of the box, that have seemed to be effective for your AuDHD clients to balance some of that pressure and burnout?
Okay, a quick suggestion. I think as we're coming to a close, there is wisdom in clinicians, in research studies and so on, but also in autistic individuals themselves. So it's a question of finding out. Now, friend and colleague Maya Tode, clinical psychologist, autistic in Copenhagen, has developed a process called energy accounting. And it's a variety of things in your day that drain you of energy, that, shall we say, deplete your bank account of energy. And there are things that are an infusion or a deposit of energy. And so that's a very practical, straightforward, autism-friendly, and the credibility and authenticity, because it's designed by an autistic person. So if in doubt, ask an autistic person.
I agree. Yeah, or an ADHD person. I just want to really affirm that with Tony, the energy accounting system is really, really, really helpful. I've used it myself to such great effect, and also with many clients. And one of the reasons I love it is it's incredibly neuroaffirming. So the person, they are the ones, they're the expert on themselves. So what are the deposits of energy? These are ones that are so important for an autistic ADHD to embrace. And there's no kind of rules about that, just whatever is good for you. So, for example, with teenage girls, the ones I've worked with, stimming is huge, needing to pace, needing to rock, needing to do things that are not in the typical girls' energy accounting system. We go, great, do that thing. That works, and then the mum's going, I don't want her upstairs pacing. I can hear it dancing. Let her pace. It's better than meltdowns. So embrace stimming, so it's a lovely structure to bring all the tools that neurodivergent people need within it. So that, thank you, Tony, and to Maya Tode for inventing this system.
And I think there'll be more in the future, because there are autistic individuals who are taking a greater role, not only in research. What I would like is psychotherapy designed by and, shall we say, practiced by autistic individuals themselves, as it a lot of the standard psychotherapies are designed for the non-autistic mindset. So there needs to be new ones.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, as we wrap up today, is there anything else that you would like to mention that we didn't quite get to cover?
Just one little thing. Some people we often get the question, what's the benefit of going for a diagnostic assessment? Or what's the benefit of knowing?
Oh, yeah.
And I think that it's a really good question and it's a very individual answer. But overall, Tony, I know you would agree with me here. We found that people benefit from knowing. And if you self-diagnose, that's great. If you can see it and go, yep, I'm definitely there, and that's all you need, then that's all you need. You don't have to go and get a formal procedure of it. It's expensive to do and very time-consuming. But for some people, I was one of these, we self-doubt too much. We can see it all but go, oh, I don't know. Like for me, no, I think it's social anxiety and depression. That sums it up. It's okay. For years I was in that space. So I needed to go through I needed peer review. So I went to a peer and I was reviewed. And yes, tick, tick. And so that was helpful for me. And I know in speaking with clients, they also find it really helpful to get a proper diagnosis, if you like, or, a formal one. But I think, what I've seen is so many of my clients start where therapy wasn't really working with the normal way of doing it. Once they got the diagnosis and got on track with who they are and how it works for them, you start to see amazing progress. So that's a great thing, moving out of conditions. I've seen people who have come out of depression just by having the diagnosis. It's like, it solves the problem.
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a lovely outcome. And then I also think it's really helpful because a lot of our autistic adults feel lost still. They still haven't answered that important question of who am I? So it really helps just with self-discovery, outside of any clinic room. It can just be super helpful. I've had loads of adults come, not because they're seeking therapy, but they just want this little question answered.
Yeah.
And then, suddenly a lot makes sense. So I think it's a gift to yourself. And if anyone's wondering about whether or not to go that way with a client or go that way themselves, I would really encourage you to do it. Also be aware that for the first year, like any process of change, there's likely to be some big emotions come up. Like there's joy and relief, but there's also some grief.
Grief and loss, maybe.
Loss. Yeah. And also there can be a feeling of, oh my God, does this mean I'm defective? Because of that internalized ableism. We can't get away from it in our society. There's so much stigma associated with being different, whether it's mental health or neurodivergence. And that comes up too. You start to think, oh, maybe I am less than. It just comes up. So just being aware that it's not all a great story, but the outcomes, I think, far outweigh that little bumpiness in the road that can occur.
Yeah. And I think the person is going to continue to need support, not necessarily therapy, support, because people will say, no, you're not autistic. In other words, you don't fit my internal schema of what an autistic person is. So you have to cope with that.
Yeah.
You also have to cope with, why didn't people pick this up earlier? My life would have been totally different if that had occurred. And we use the phrase to look at your past through the lens of autism, that it now makes sense. But you can now make better decisions currently and in the future based on strengths, not what you think you ought to be doing.
Yeah. A great final line. So I'll, of course, link your website, but I just want to add too that you guys have so many neat trainings across these topics. You have autism, you have autism for women, you have ADHD. So for people listening, I think I'm one of them that I could just talk about this with you for hours. There are some deep dives that people can go on with you to get a little bit more information.
Well, it's a whole library.
Yeah.
We have so many. I counted them recently, as Tony knows, and I think there's over 30, like there's 32 or 34 now. We've been busy, Tony.
We have. We've done a lot.
Yeah.
One a month for quite a few years. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you so much for all of your research and for taking the time to talk about this and share it with us. It's just been a wealth of knowledge and so much fun to chat with you.
Oh, fantastic.
It has been fun. Thanks, Lorraine.
It has been fun, and thank you for inviting us, Lorraine. All the very best to you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Self Careapist Podcast. If you did, please subscribe and feel free to leave a review. You can also follow along at the Self Careapist on Instagram or head to lorrainemoorhead.com/podcast to grab a free copy of your own Learning Map worksheet to help track all of the tools and strategies you're interested in learning more about. See you next Wednesday.